Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, part 2 of our profile of a Marine wounded in Iraq who was given opioids by the military and how it changed his life. Also, an interview with the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Find out what's on his mind as a new administration prepares to take over. Finally, NATO's Arctic Marines. Learn about the alliance's troops in the far north. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Diana Stancy. When Jonathan Basara came back from Iraq in the late 2000s, he was suffering from a host of traumas, both physical and mental. Sent to a residential program to heal, he was also prescribed opioids, which over time added to his struggles. We caught up with Basara nearly a decade after his wounds and found him still reckoning with both his injuries and his recovery. As part of our Veterans Month coverage, we wanted to bring you some of his story. Here's part 2, and the rest can be found on militarytimes.com and our YouTube page. Have a look.
It was a suicide VBIED. He had 9 .155 shells in the trunk. And I looked over and noticed that not only did it kill Corporal Letzum, but it killed about 30 kids coming out of the school. You know, it haunts me. It's like, that's what really bothers me, is all the innocents that got killed over there, the little kids that got killed. So that first one that hit me, you know, shattered some of my teeth. I was bleeding out of my ears, my nose. They told me, you know, on opiates, you're not allowed to leave the wire. So nobody wanted to be on opiates. Nobody wanted it, you know? So they transferred me to Wounded Warriors headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland. And I want to say January 2009, December 2008 time period. I was there for about 2.5 years. The whole time I was there, I was on opiates and anti-anxiety medications, different ones, all different kind of medications, every month on a different medication. Everybody was on fentanyl, you know, oxycodone, morphine, or not morphine, the morphine pills, Dilaudid, fucking every painkiller you can think of, you would be able to find at that barracks. Watched 2 people overdose while I was in there. You know, so when I got to Wounded Warriors, my main goal was trying to focus on not thinking so much and not feeling so guilty. Not having that pain in my heart, you know, in my head, of feeling guilty about not going back, and, you know, what happened to the people. Could I have done more in these situations? Could I have saved my buddy if I maybe just did something else?
When you're at Wounded Warriors, how many prescriptions are you on at that point?
I was on gabapentin, prazosin, oxycodone, fentanyl for a little while, Motrin. I started having points to where one wasn't enough, and I was taking 2 or 3 to have that breakthrough the pain, to break through that, you know, sharpness of the pain. And then there was times where I wouldn't take them for a day. I was doing something like having fun or being out somewhere, and my medication was back in my room, and I started noticing, you know, discomfort, stomach aches, sweats a little bit. And I realized after I didn't get my painkillers the day I was supposed to, and it was a weekend, so I couldn't get them until Monday, and I was sick the whole weekend. I was up, throwing up. It was the first time I ever felt like really sick from not taking medication. I realized that's what it was.
This is why you're still at Wounded Warriors?
This is why I'm still at Wounded Warriors. So I went to street drugs. I went to heroin because it was the only thing that was cheap enough to get me through. I would do like 2 to 4 bags a day. My parents controlled my money and gave it out to me a day. And that's one of the hardest things to do, is have that talk with your parents and actually tell them that, listen, I need to do this until I can find some help. And this is 2014. This is after 4 years of being on them from the VA and 2 years or 3 years of being on painkillers in the military. So I've been on them for the better part of a decade now, you know, going to nothing. Every single day I wake up, have my parents give me my $20 or $40, whatever it was, and I would go call all my dealers to find somebody that was awake. You feel sicker than you've ever felt in your life, and you just push this plunger down one time and you magically goes away, like instantly. And all your thoughts, you might still have them, but you don't care anymore. It doesn't bother you. That feeling of, you know, knowing that all that pain's gonna go away, you will pretty much do anything you have to do to get it. And I've ruined relationships with friends that, you know, I borrowed money off of and couldn't pay back. You know, I went and stole stuff off my parents and sold it at, you know, pawn shops.
And at this point, the VA's like, you failed that drug test.
Yeah, I just stopped going.
Yeah.
I cut ties with the VA. They were still paying me and everything like that, but I stopped going to them for any kind of medical treatment.
He was actually stealing things from God knows who besides his mother and me. So, you know, it was the typical thing that you go one day and something's missing in the house, you wonder where it went, and, you know, you confront him and you just get this blank stare. Right now, this isn't my original wedding ring. He sold that. He sold all sorts of stuff. They would steal things. He ended up scrapping under the boardwalk at the Jersey Shore for copper wire, and that's how he was arrested by one of my friends that I had worked with that, you know, caught him so easily. Here's a kid that was trained as a scout sniper, caught by a guy that's, you know, basically going to Wawa, get coffee and donuts, and he walks right up to him and locks him up.
The first 7 days are the worst, because you're going through the hard withdrawals. You're not sleeping at all. You're uncomfortable. You don't have any clothing except for a jumpsuit on you. No shoes, no socks. It's usually freezing in there, and you can't eat any of the food because you're just sick all day long. So you're just trying to drink as much water as you can, but you're constantly throwing up, and you know, you have diarrhea the whole time, but you're sitting there on a toilet that's in front of everybody, you know, and there's about 20 other people in the holding cell doing the same thing. When I got out of jail, I was clean. I went to probation, but I wasn't mentally clean.
When you look at him, he's 6'4", 250 pounds. Why can't this person go out there and hold a 9-to-5 job and just go do things?
After me and John got together for a while, I realized that he was more incapable of day-to-day, daily activities for, you know, our needs.
I get a letter in the mail saying, from the VA, saying your benefits have been terminated because you have a felony warrant.
When we come back, a conversation with the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Hear what he has to say about the future of care for vets. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. With the election of a new administration, a lot of top leadership roles change hands in the government and Pentagon, including the top post at the Department of Veterans Affairs. With a few months left in the hot seat, Secretary of the VA, Dennis McDonough, sat down with us to look at what his office has achieved, what's left to do, and how to continue to improve one of the nation's biggest bureaucracies. Here's part of his conversation with Military Times' Leo Shane.
Mr. Secretary, thank you again for having
Leo,
us here
thank
and getting to chat a little bit about what's happened in the last year and the last 4 years under the Biden administration. Your job is to oversee VA to make sure the benefits are going out to take care of it's crisis control in a lot of different ways. My job is to press you on this and to look at not always the negatives, but a lot of the shortfalls and things like that. Do you feel like that we as a country talk enough about the point that you raised about veterans being community leaders? You and I have both seen studies that say veterans are more likely to be volunteers. They're more likely to be involved in civic service afterwards. We see all these positives, but because of the nature of the demands of this job, you're mostly focusing on what are the gaps and how do I fill those in. Do we need more attention on that positive aspect, that aspect of what veterans are bringing to America even after service?
There is a narrative that is so inaccurate that somehow veterans are broken. That is not my lived experience, right? Look at these newly elected members of Congress in the last couple of terms. Look at business leaders across the country. Look at who are the coaches for your kids? Who are the ministers at who are the electors at your parish? You know what I mean? Who are the youth ministers at your parish? It's vets. These people aren't broken. They're fixing a broken community in many places. They're fixing spots where America is breaking, and they're refusing to let that happen. So that, I think, collectively, we owe the country a clearer story on. And this is why every time I've appeared before you in the press briefing room, I've had VA providers talking about programming that's successful. Every time I testify before Congress, I have a story about a VA person, a VA employee, and a veteran. Because sometimes I think we don't lift up, or at least I want to lift up those stories where VA is working well and where veterans are doing awesome work. What does that mean about, the next secretary or my time here? I don't know. But what I do know is veterans are kicking ass all over this country. We got to do a better job keeping up with them, making sure they have what they need. And the country is stronger for them. And those veterans out there who are wrestling with crisis, if they, as too often we hear, are feeling like they're a burden, let me just be very clear to them. You're what this country needs. You're not a burden. You are the strength of this country.
Another major priority, not just for your administration, but for the last several, has been suicide prevention among veterans, which we haven't seen, unfortunately, the same progress on. At this point, what needs to happen? How does that number start to come down?
It is stubbornly high, maddeningly high, and heartbreakingly high, right? Especially when you think about what, in so many cases, we see veterans saying, as they're struggling with crisis and as they're contemplating death by suicide, they feel like they're a burden. And think about that, about how we're missing the boat here, where people who have given everything to protect this country, and when you go around the country, you know this as well as I do, and I say this as a non-veteran, every time there's something interesting happening in a community, city, a state, around the country, inevitably there is a veteran involved, inevitably. So we need to tell veterans that you are not a burden. In fact, you're why we're the strength that we're as strong as we are, and we need you now more than ever. So what needs to happen beyond that? One, we have to continue to underscore what we prove every day here at VA, which suicide is preventable, okay? And I want veterans to hear that. In your moment of maximum crisis, suicide is preventable. Second, we have to continue to dedicate the resources. So many of our veterans who die by suicide have not been diagnosed with mental health disorder, are not in relationship with VA. So we have to make sure that we are getting them into relationship with us. For example, we established in the last year's Suicide Prevention Annual Report a correlation between veterans who get their VA benefits, that $187 billion I talked about a minute ago, are correlated to lower suicidality. So if you're in relationship with a VBA, with Veterans Benefits Administration, you're less likely to die by suicide. So resourcing is important. Third is engaging the entire community. I think we've made good progress, and hats off to John Tester and John Bozeman, Mike Bost, Mark Takano, Phil Rowe, whom I called about this just about 6 weeks ago, who put together the Fox grants, the Sergeant Gordon Parker Fox grants to local organizations who are supporting veterans in their communities. That's based on the simple knowledge that, the simple fact that we don't possess all knowledge here in the nation's capital. Our local communities who know their veterans are best positioned to know what our veterans are struggling with, so let's invest in them. So intentionality, resourcing, strengthening the entire ecosystem, and then making sure that veterans understand suicide is preventable. And we prove this every day for you. We just have to keep doing it.
When we come back, our personal finance expert returns with tips on how you can prepare now for your retirement. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. Are you saving enough for retirement there, Airmen? On this week's edition of Money Minute, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union is back with tips on preparing for your retirement years after service. Have a look.
When it comes to retirement, whether you're approaching the end of your military career or just considering your future, starting early makes all the difference because time is money. Most people put off planning for retirement because they don't know when or where to start. Retirement takes planning, and in this case, knowledge truly is power, so take note. As a retiring service member, a good rule of thumb is to start planning for retirement at least 2 years in advance. Before you separate, be sure to attend Transition Assistance Program or TAP workshops and schedule counseling sessions. At this stage, it's highly recommended to work with a trusted financial advisor before making any major financial decisions. When it comes to housing, remember, you're entitled to a government-paid move. If you plan to work post-military, start your job search early, attend job fairs, work your connections, and search veteran job boards. Once you're employed, take advantage of employer-funded retirement plans and keep saving up for your golden years. The best way to accomplish your retirement mission is to prepare, plan, and execute. That way, you'll set yourself up for continued success in the next chapter of your life.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, point the lens on your spy plane at militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the most up-to-date info officer in the SCIF, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning to bring you the most recent headlines. Lastly, if social media is where you collect open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And just like most junior troops, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. When we come back, a look at NATO's Arctic Marines. Check out how the alliance operates in the far north. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Diana Stancy. NATO is comprised of a bristling array of military capabilities with interests in a number of climate zones. With conditions rapidly changing in the Arctic regions, it's looking to keep pace and assert itself, which is where the Arctic Marines come in. Here's a look at some of the alliance's cold weather forces and how they work to be ready to fight in the high north.
We have a large number of Marines who have never been in the snow in their life before. So as Marines, we have a hallmark of being able to fight in any climate and place. And in order to do that, it just takes practice and just grow in that proficiency through the repetition.
The falling's all part of it. Just learning the right ways to fall and then the best ways to get back up after you fall is very important. Hard part about being in the Marine Corps and skiing is you have to ski with the main pack and your weapon. So teaching the guys now the basics without all that helps just the building block approach. They're picking up very fast, and I'm really happy with what I'm seeing.
So what's distinguishes a Swedish Marine is that since we operate so dispersed, we can operate by ourselves for a long period of time in pretty harsh environments.
It's way harder to navigate than I thought.
It's pretty cramped. On the first impressions, we have too much stuff.
Well, you have to be resilient, and you have to have a strong will. A will to push yourself to the extreme and a bit further.
They must be innovative to solve different tasks and when problems occur, because they will.
In the Marine Corps, have you ever done anything this hard?
No, not really. I personally think this is my hardest training op I've ever done.
The difference between us a month ago and now is night and day. People know how to take care of themselves better. They understand their day-to-day routines. They understand the basics of what they need to get through day to day, which means that the battalion can focus more on being enemy-oriented rather than focusing on sustaining ourselves internally.
Should have been out of here an hour ago.
The thing about Finns is we all more or less grew up on skis, but yeah, I'm a bit scared to climb the biggest hills here because it's quite different from Finland. Finland is very flat, so.
Our brigade is founded by a Swedish king. A Swedish company can come to Finland, report into the battalion commander, and 3 hours from that they can do a combined mission already.
Say, for instance, in a future conflict, being able to fly with different countries, just the one that is on station in that area at that time, is making us 100 times more dangerous for a possible enemy. It's always nice to hear different countries' voices on the radio and knowing that you do basically the same thing already. So you don't need any pre-training, just get right into it.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.